Hey guys, my name is Jonathan, and today we're going to be taking a look at how I wrote my song DIOMA, out now on No Copyright Sound. So this song started originally as an idea that I was doing on the Poly D. I had this really interesting arpeggiated bass line that I wanted to mess with. So at first that reminded me of like a spy about to go into a nightclub and completely John Wick the place. And so I kind of wanted to emulate that feeling as much as possible with the intro. I should also start by saying that the main bass line is made up of about 4 or 5 different basses, and those basses are the main Poly D bass, that sounds like this. But as you can see here, I rolled off some of the lows and a little bit of the highs. The distortion on the Poly D is pretty harsh, so I wanted to get rid of as much of that high-end like white noise as possible here. And then I brought in some saturation to kind of bring out more distortion, some compression to kind of even everything out, and then a little bit more kind of like creative EQing right here, and then just another roll off of the highs here. The second bass I have is this sub bass. If you have your headphones, or if you're listening to these on monitors, you'll be able to hear this. And that's just controlling the lower frequencies. This third bass I have here is an Oliver bass patch from their Power Tools 2 sample pack. One of the best sample packs out there. I highly recommend it. This bass pluck is just kind of adding a little bit more width to the plucks. And then as you can see, I got rid of some more of that low end. I didn't want it interfering with too much with the original bass tones of the Poly D. And then the next one that I have here is an Omnisphere bass patch. That's just controlling the higher end frequencies of the bass plucks. There we go. And then that sounds like this. So far, altogether, these sound like this. And then this bass here that we have is kind of like my bread and butter bass. I wish that I remember where the original like Serum bass patch for this was. Somebody named Derek made it apparently. I don't remember what that was from. But with everything turned off, it sounds like this. And then with everything turned back on. And that is kind of going to be like our little catalyst point in between each section. So another really important layer that I have here is the strings layer. This first layer of strings I have here is a contact instrument called Session Strings 2. It's one of my favorite ones out there, aside from this rhythmic texture ones. This one's really cool too. But this one is just kind of like a tremolo string leading you into the next section as well. And then underneath that, I have just kind of like this string stab from Kashmir here. It's a little bit weak, but it's just kind of like carrying the like undertones of that. And then this last one I have is just kind of like a really strong brass note. Yeah. And then all of those together sound like this. Cool. All right, and then on to the drums. So one thing I really like to do with my drums is go on Splice and find a drum loop that I think is really interesting, but is lacking something that I think I can add to it. So one thing I took here originally was this Oliver drum loop here. So one thing I did do to the drums here is boost a tiny bit of the low end and then remove some of those higher end frequencies that were kind of hurting my ears. And then I added some saturation to kind of beef everything up in the drums, and then brought in some glue compressor to kind of just tighten everything back down. And then I added some limiter just to make sure everything wasn't going to clip. And then this top layer of drums I have here is just kind of like a drum thing that I made. And then so far those together sound like this. And then after that, it's just kind of layering a bunch of like kicks and snares to get the sound that I really want. And then once we add the bass, the strings, and then everything else, those come together to sound like this. Okay, and then so now that we move on to this next section, it's important to point out what I removed and then what I added here for this next section. So what I did with this poly bass is I replaced it with another one that's just a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more distorted, and I think it has a little bit more decay on the plex. Yeah. So compared that to this one. Just kind of flows a little bit better. And then this next bass pluck here is a Serum bass pluck that I made at some point. And that has some low end removed here, and then some flanger, and a little bit of boosting in the mids and a little bit in the highs here. And that's kind of like the main bass pluck noise for the rest of the song too, actually. And then this next bass patch that we have is another Omnisphere bass patch that's a way more aggressive than all the rest of them combined, and those sound like this. I forgot, it is important to point out that I do have this just singular E note being pressed here. Cool. And then another thing that I did was I removed that sub bass and replaced it with this kind of 4 on the floor, just boom, boom, boom bass right here. And that's just a saw wave bass, I believe. And then this is just a saw wave bass, I believe, with some distortion and a low pass filter, distortion and some compression, yeah. And then this next one is just kind of like a higher end bass note pluck thing. Probably can't even hear it. And then I have a bass pluck here. Another cool thing that I did with the drums here is I replaced this first drum layer. I replaced this with this. So these drums are way harder. And then we can just actually hear this whole thing by itself too. So these risers that I have here are just kind of some fun stuff that I made and some stuff that I found on Splice as well. So now this new section is going to lead us into the drop. Drop number 1. Okay, so let's break down the first drop. So this new Poly D bass is now doing this. I wanted everything to follow just kind of like a more basic arpeggiated pattern so that I could hide the original bass pattern, I believe, in the plucks here. I wanted to add some variety to it and make that original melody kind of become something more than just the main bass melody. And then I have this groove bass just following everything else again. And then one thing here too is that I introduce a lead, but before I introduced the lead, I just took one tiny part and then put it on every snare hit. And then another thing that I did was I added these chords here. Now I had to bounce these out, unfortunately, just because my
computer
couldn't handle a Prophet 5 synth and serum at the same exact time. But this first serum patch is just kind of being like the body of the chords. And then this Prophet 5 one is just kind of doing the more airy tone to it. And then another thing you can see is I pan this to the right a little bit and this one to the left just to kind of create more width to the chords. And then we move on to the first lead. Sorry about all the underruns, by the way. Like I said, my computer's really old. So this first lead layer, I believe this is just a pre-made silent 1 patch, and then that's followed by another silent 1 patch that just has all distortion. I believe it's just a saw wave, but it's all distortion. And then together. And then this section leads into our first kind of mini breakdown. So one thing that's really cool is that I added these plucks here, and then these are doing the original bass melody, but in like double time. So I believe this first thing is actually a bass patch. Yeah, it's just a regular serum bass patch right here. And it's just the highest octave that it could be. And then I added some variety to the plucks here. And then the second pluck layer here is an omnisphere patch. And then this one is the cranky electric ember lead. And then together. Yeah, and then one cool thing I did here too in the drums section in the reload department is I added this little gun sound effect just because I thought it'd be cool. And then with everything all together. So this section, this breakdown section, is going to lead us into our second act of the song, or whatever you want to call it. So one of the things I wanted to do at first for this section was change the rhythm of everything. So the way I did that was... And then I wanted to harmonize these with this lead here. That's pushed back super far in the background. With some filters, a bunch of reverb. All right, and then for the drums and percussions, I don't have much going on here. I just have one hat playing. And then a crash. Oh, some cymbals actually. Oh, more cymbals. Oh, and then I have this crash thing here, just kind of following the bass line. So this is, I believe this is just like a wooden something, I can't remember, but then I just looped it to be in time. And this is one of my favorite sounds ever. I usually try to hide this in like most of my tracks. And then altogether that sounds like this. Okay, so this little melodic section here, I originally wrote this on the poly, and that sounds by itself, that sounds like this. And then as you can see, I named the group Change to Harpsichord because I just wanted this whole thing to be harpsichord, but by itself it doesn't sound as like full, and it doesn't have as much presence as I want it to have. So when I combined the two and then took this last section here, duplicated it, and then I pitched it down an octave, this whole thing sounds way better. And then underneath all of that is this hidden guitar here, playing the original bass melody. Oh, and then another thing I have here are these really cool drums that I found on Splice that I chopped up a bunch and renamed it Lido shit, because this is just something that Lido would do. And then that leads us into our second section here. So there's not much really happening here in this drum department. I did add these Latin percussion here that you can't really hear too much. It's kind of hidden. But I think they're cool. And then this new bass section here has almost all of the basses together now, and this J bass here is way more prominent. Another thing that I did was I just changed the pattern of it because I wanted this to still remain similar to the first drop, but just have a new feel to it, like a different rhythm. And then you can see that this groove bass here is just following it and just adding more emphasis on every like note change. And then we have this lead here. Then we have this lead here, which is harmonizing with the bass notes and has this like anthemic type of feel to it. Or at least that's how I feel. And then I also have these pianos playing here. These are just stock Ableton pianos. Let me close this. Okay, and then altogether this new section sounds like this. These notes right here are the same notes here, but they're just adding a little bit more like depth to the reverb. They're pitched up an octave, and I think they sound cool. And then this whole section here just pitches up an entire octave. And then I added chords here and vocals, which is an omnisphere patch. There's a beep. And then this whole section right here leads into this mega breakdown part, which is kind of like the climax of the song, twice. So this whole section here just follows that first rhythmic pattern that we had for this section of the song. So if I just solo this section, and then I have this lead melody happening in between the drum hits. And then these plucks here are just kind of like emphasizing this melody here. And then for this section here, I got rid of most of the bass layers except for the hardest ones. So you have this poly layer here. And then I also have this high layer here. This is just a stock Ableton instrument called magnetic strings. I messed around with it a bunch to get this sound here. The leads here are being doubled up on that original melody that we had in the beginning of this section. Followed by the chords that are hitting on every drum kick. So for the drum section, what I did was I turned everything into halftime. And then on top of the drums, I have these risers. Followed by these crashes with some splashes right here. And if you note, I actually have the crashes panned on either side. These are two separate crashes here. And then I have these hats here, and I have this ride groove that kind of, and then I have these hats with this ride groove that's kind of filling in the spaces right here. And that just kind of adds a little bit of swing to everything. Okay, and then from the mega breakdown, we enter the TikTok section. So what I did with the TikTok audio was I just chopped up certain parts that I liked about it. So the first thing that I did with this TikTok audio is I just chopped up the parts that made sense the most. So essentially just the octave changes and the most prominent pitch changes of it. And then I just let this section go. With that added little thing here. And then that gets paired off with this like filtered intro of the song. this section here is just the string sections with those cashmere hits. And now we're on to my favorite part of the song, which is kind of the recreation of that TikTok audio, but on steroids, if you will. I wanted to retain that energy as much as possible, but kind of push it to its limits by adding as many synths on as possible. So one of the first things that you can hear is that I add this pluck here to kind of act as like a harmony layer to those bass notes. And then I added back that cranky umbra sound. One really important thing to add for this section, I have this just getting pushed to its absolute limits here. And this sound just kind of gets louder and louder and just pulls you into it, just kind of making this whole section feel a little bit disorienting as it pulls you in. And then we go straight into drop 3, baby, which is technically drop 2, but with just a little bit of spice. So the spice I'm referring to here is just more like hats and stuff being more prominent. Okay, so now we have entered the final territory of this song. So for this section, what I did was I took the mega breakdown and I duplicated the length and just added a bunch of risers to really pull you into the intensity of this section. So one of the key things that I have here for this second section is those magnetic strings once again. This whole section without it, so this whole section right here without these strings, leaves it kind of blank and empty a little bit. I feel like it doesn't pull you in as much as when they are there. And then another thing that I really love to do is these kind of like stutter edity things here. Another thing that I added for the second section are these splashes here. And then for the risers here, I have this thing called the decimation riser, which is super intense. And then my little J build right there. And then one of the last things I did here was I put this delay on this bass layer. I know it's kind of taboo to put like reverbs and delay on the bass layers, but the timing on it is very weird and it's automated, so it kind of has this rising effect. And I just think that ends the song perfectly. this last thing here, sped up originally sounds like this. But I stretched it and then pitched it down 40 semitones. And that just hits nice. That just hits really nice in those deep bass layers. And then this nice automation just kind of fading everything out. And that, in a nutshell, is how I wrote DIOMA. Sorry if I skipped over a few things. This is the first time I've ever made one of these types of videos before. And I want to give a huge thank you to No Copyright Sounds for releasing DIOMA and then allowing me to make this kind of video for you guys. And please stick around for more because I have a bunch of new music coming very, very soon. And lastly, thanks to you guys for watching and supporting everything. Have a good day, guys. Bye.